All right. Good morning, guys. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Shabbos Daf Kuf Nun Gimel. Before we give the intro, as we closed off in the last year, the top line on Kuf Nun Gimel, regarding the neshamot oila v'shuv eino yoredes, as we learned to Tosfos, just to quote the Alter Rebbe in Igeres Chav Zayin, right? Keyadu, as we learned this letter quite often, speaks about the three levels of the neshama, going milmata l'mayla, nefesh, ruach, neshama, that the nefesh stays with the body, and the neshama take stays in Gan Eden. And Alter Rebbe explains how the ruach is something that goes up and it comes down, and that makes us appreciate Tosfos even better. In other words, when Tosfos is going on the Chazal that neshamot oila v'shuv eino yoredes, the chiddush is that even the level of neshama, if the tzaddik wants, then even that comes down over here as well. All right, Chavre, we're going to continue finishing. We're going to be finishing the 23rd Perek. We're going to learn the concept that mehespedoi shel adam nikar in ben olam habahu. We're going to learn the concept nimtza kol yamav b'tshuva, and with Hashem's help, we're going to start the final chapter, the 24th chapter. As we mentioned, this is the longest Masechta in words. We're going to start learning more about the general prohibition of Amira La'akum. And here is the Rashi, Kuf Nun Gimel, that Alter Rebbe paskins like the Shita, that Amira La'akum is also connected to the concept of Yesh Shlichus La'akum L'chumra. In other words, there is not only us being prohibited to speak to a guy on Shabbos to do something that we may not do, but even if we spoke to a guy prior to Shabbos, or even if we never asked him at all, if something is done on our behalf on Shabbos, so mitzad, the chumrah that we say shlichus, that's also going to generally be prohibited to derive benefit thereof, but we're going to be learning about an exception. Exception will be if a person is traveling and it's coming in Shabbos and you have your wallet with you and there is a guy there. So you are allowed to ask the guy to carry your wallet for you, because Chazal were afraid that if they won't give you that heter, then because of the Nisayan, you might end up carrying the wallet yourself. Now, there's another option that the Mishnah gives, and that is if you have your animal with you. So now we're going to be reviewing the halachis of being mechamed acher behemtoi. When it comes to one's animals, doing certain malachas on Shabbos, So as we learned this on Daf Nun Aleph, if you remember, in the beginning of Bameh Behema, so we learned to Tosfos, I hope we learned to Tosfos, that there is a mitzvah saseh. This is timely because the mitzvah saseh is from the Aseres HaDibros in Parshas Voschanan. There is the Laman Yonuach, and then you have another, here it's a lav, that loisasa kol malacha ata, etc., uvehem techa. And we apply the lav, if you are leading your animal, that's called you are being mechamer acher behemta. Now we're speaking lomashal, that you put something on your animal, so the animal is carrying, and you're being mechamer acherav. Here there is a lav involved. And here also the Mishnah says, if there is no goy, you can put your wallet on the animal. And obviously the question will be, Mela, the Chachamim have the right to take away a rabbinic prohibition for a greater purpose, because it's a darabanan. But the Chachamim are never allowed to take away a mitzvah saseh d'oraisa. So we're going to have to explain that the type of mechamer that the Mishnah is referring to is one that is only asur midrabanan, and there is the heter if it is your wallet. So really we're going to be learning a series of priorities. Again, if you have your wallet and you have a goy and there's also an animal and there are other options, what should we do first? And only if that's not available, what do we do second? So there's going to be a goy, there's going to be a chamoir, there's going to be a shoita, and then there's going to be a chedesh, there's going to be a cotton, there's going to be a discussion, chedesh and cotton, by whom is there, so to say, a lesser of a violation? B'meila, that should be the one that should carry it. And we're finally going to learn at the end of the DAF, the first version of Shitas Rami Bar Chama regarding Hamachamer Acher Behemtoi, that he holds that if one does so, not when there is exception. You properly put something on your animal does one of the malachas for you when you're walking behind your animal, it's mamish a av. That means that the shoygig yichayv chatos, the mezid yichayv skila. Unlike another version of Rami Bar Chama that God willing will learn in Kuf Nun Daled, and we're going to be speaking about, if that's the case, why didn't the Mishnah speak about Machamer Acher Behemtoi as one of the Avos Malachis, and a lot more. Chavra, let us start. Yishmak over here, we're on the top line of Kuf Nun Gimel Amud Aleph. Okay? The end of the line, Amar Rav Yehuda. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shehakol mi'v'doi. Says the Gemara, Amar Rav Yehuda b'nei Rav Shmuel bar Shilas. In the name of Rav, Mehespedoi shel Adam, from the hesped of a person, really from the effect that the hesped is having on the listeners, Nikar, we can discern im ben olam haba, who, whether this person is ben olam haba or im lav. Zakt Rashi, what does it mean Mehespedoi Nikar? She'im, top line, she'im kosher hoya hakoil boichen olav. If people react by crying, ma'ridin demois, misaplim shvachai, then he's a ben olam haba. Fragt die Gemara Eini, v'ha'amar lei Rav to Rav Shmuel bar Shilas, that when you're going to eulogize for me, achim behesped, achim from chamimus, make sure that you give a warm hesped. You know why? Look, as we have been learning, because the Hassan come in, I'm going to be there, I'm going to be listening. Now hold on, Rav is Adam, that is a ben olam haba. If people react with tears by a hesped, then why is he telling the eulogizer to make an effort? The Gemara says, like kasha. An effort has to be made, even for the greatest Adam kasher. If the eulogizer is nish angevarimt and people don't cry, it doesn't show to anything. It's not a simon for anything. Ha the machamule. If the eulogizer speaks warmly and the people react, va'achim, people get warmed up and people shed a tear, that's the simon that he's a ben olam haba or she's a ben olam haba. Ha the machamule v'le'achim. The vart is, right, that if the eulogizer does a good job and still people don't cry, that's the negative siman. What about you? The son who lay kula pumpadisoi gavalt. Rabbi was the Rav in Pumpadisa. Now he was a very strong Rav, and he pushed people. And look at the words over here. Abai is telling his teacher Rabbi, everyone hates you there. And now we're saying that even for Adam Kasher, you have to have the eulogizer speaking warmly. Manachem Espedu, who's going to be able to speak warmly about you when people don't have such great feelings for you? Amalei, So to which Rabbi responded, I don't need to have a ganze lineup of people eulogizing me. That you and Rabbi Baraf Chanan will eulogize me. You do have warm feelings for me. You will eulogize me warmly. That's enough of his faithim. And he, again, in this context, and he was confident that the people then, after his passing, then the hatred will go away and they will actually shed a tear or more for the passing of the great Rabbi. Says the Gemara, Boy Minei Rabbi Elazar Mei Rab. Izeo ben Olam Haba Omar Lei, quoting a pasuk in Yeshaya, that the Oznecha Tishmayna Davar Ma'acharecha Lemer, that your ears will hear someone behind you speaking. Now what? Zehaderech L'chubai. This is the way, this is the path upon which you should walk. Kisaminu, whether the person went to the right, Chisasmilu, whether the person went to the left. In other words, when a person, after the passing, as they are aware of what's being spoken, they hear words being spoken behind them. That's his expression. So if people are going to be eulogizing the oilam by saying, that's the way to live, that in itself is a siman that a person is a ben oilam haba. Rab Chanina Amar, another siman, Kol Shadas Rabboisav Noichahimenu. Having your parents speaking greatly about you, having your Talmidim is not enough. If your teachers are pleased with the way you lived, that's a siman that you are a ben olam haba. And now, my friends, we're going back to the pasuk in Koheles, right, about the youth and about getting older and about the passing, and v'savavu bashuk hasoiftim, right, that a man is going la'olam moi. That was the diuk we had. And then the eulogizers go about on the streets. So b'nei Galili Amri asay devarim lifnei mitascham. While you are alive, you better do things correctly before your mita. B'nei Yehuda said the same expression. While you are alive, asay devarim la'achar mitascham. Now, what if that lifnei mitascham la'achar mitascham says the Gemara v'lei pligi that marki asrei or marki asrei? Where did the eulogizer stand vis-a-vis the coffin? Different minhagim. Sometimes people had the coffin behind them. Sometimes they spoke when the coffin was in front of them. And you should live a type of life that when you are being eulogized, that's the word in the pasuk, that the people that are eulogizer have what to say. They can be speaking about you when they're standing in front of you. Hassan says, the word says in the Mishnah in Pirkei Avos, that a person should do tshuva one day before they pass. In other words, the simple pshat here is that don't feel that, I wasted my whole life on the wrong path. No, if you're still living, it's one day before you're passing, you're 119 years old, you can still do tshuva. However, how can you do tshuva one day before you pass? So Amalei, to which he responded, that's the point, that's part of the point. Indeed, Yoshuv Hayoim, do tshuva today, Shema Yomus Lamacha, because tomorrow you might not be here. And therefore, if you're going to take this teaching to heart, then himself, Kol Yom of B'tshuva. Right. Now, Shlomo Amar B'chachmasai, when Shlomo Melech says, V'chol Eisir B'godecha Levanim, at all times, let your garments be white. The Shemen al Roishcha al Yechsar, Chevre, the Yenuka, right? Tanya Perek Lamed Hey, and the Alter Rebbe repeats this again and again. We have this at the end in Perek Nun Gimel, right? That's the word of the Yenuka saying that Shlomo Melech Av Shlomo Tzavach, that the Shemen al Roishcha al Yechsar. When we have this metaphor, right, the Yenuka in Gan Eden, that Rabbi overheard speaking about that the Shechina is a fire above our heads and the body is a wick. But in order for the wick to properly, in order for the fire, for the Shechina to properly adhere to the body without burning it, so v'shemen al roishcha al yachsar, you have to oil it. And as the whole diuk that the Rebbe makes is that the Yenuka didn't say shemen means Torah. Many times shemen is in reference to Torah, but the shemen al roishcha al yachsar says the Yenuka is uvdin tovin. And we have to every day do uvdin tovin to give oil. And that's what Shlomo Melech is referring to, and this is mamish. We'll see. This is what the Gemara is really going to be alluding to. He invites his chavra to come to a meal, to come to a banquet, but now pikchen shebahem kishto atzman, they got ready. The Yoshval Pesach Beis HaMelech, and they were waiting over there by the king. Why is that? Because if I invite you for a banquet, you know that it's going to take me who knows how long to prepare it. So you know you have some time. The Melech is the Melech. If the Melech wants, he can begin the banquet this moment. That's what they say. Amru, klum chasel beis hamelech. And therefore, since any moment he might invite us in, we have to continuously be ready, right? That's the nimtza kol yom b'tshuva. However, tibshum shubahem, because they say klum yeshu uda b'loy toirach. There's going to be a toirach. We have time anyways. And pisoim bikesh hamelech es avodov. Bikhem shubahem. Nechnasu lefanov kisheim yikushat. Ba'ativshim nechnasu lefanov kisheim yolochlachim. Samach hamelech likras pichim and v'koas likras tatipshim. And Omar, right? This is all the mashal. And the king says that halalu shekishus atzmon l'seuda. Therefore yeshvu v'yochlu v'yishtu. But halalu shelekishtu atzmon l'seuda. Yandu v'yiru, which is not the end of the world relative to the next version. Yandu v'yiru means they're not going to hell, but they can't eat. They have to stand and look. However, Hassan shel Rabbi Meir, Mishum Rabbi Meir Omer, Rabbi Meir's son-in-law says, no. Af hey nirim kimishamshim. What are you telling me? You're giving them too much. Just not allowing them to eat is not enough as a consequence for them not getting ready. Elo elu ve'elu yoshvim. No, they don't stand. They both sit. Halalu eichlim v'halalu re'evim. Wow. Halalu shoisim v'halalu tzemeim. Not that he puts them in a worse place. He brings them even closer and they cannot partake. Shenever as it says, Koyomer Hashem, Hine yavoda yoichelu, ma yavoda molit. But va'atem tirou, you'll go hungry. Going hungry doesn't mean standing on the sides. I know that's hunger. Going hungry means you're sitting at the table and you're going hungry. Hine yavodem yishtu, but va'atem titzmou. Hine yavoda yoroinu, mituv leiv, but va'atem titzaku mike'ev leiv. Says the Gemara that what does that refer to? That refers to tzitzis, as the Mashra explains. Tzitzis is a mitzvah that for a big time in Jewish history we were never able to perform it perfectly because we don't have tchelas. Nevertheless, even though we can't do it perfectly, we do what we could. We do some of it. That was the emphasis. Do something. When it says V'shemen al reish chal yechsar, what does that refer to? It refers to tefillin, says the Marsha, based on the Rashi, the last Rashi in the Spedic, that he's speaking about tefillin shebaroish, v'ro kol ha'yaretz v'chulei. In other words, that tefillin shebaroish, as we take a paskin, that the hand and the head tefillin are two separate mitzvahs. And as we who go miftzayim sometimes have to do when the yid doesn't want to put on tefillin, put it on his head. You have to have a little bit more participation for him to roll up a sleeve. But if he's not rolling up a sleeve, at least do part of the mitzvah. The idea of do what you could. That's the emphasis of the pasuk, which is beautiful. And by the way, here you see clearly, going back to the Alter Rebbe, that the examples that were given for the shemen and for the begadim, well, begadim is machshava dever amaisa, but is tzitzis and tefillin amaisa. That's the whole chiddush. That which should keep the neshama connected to the body, especially if you're speaking about that the fire is on top of your head. Chacham einav b'roshai should have been limud ha'torah. So that was the whole word of the Alter Rebbe. That the kavana is dira b'tachtainim. The shechina we want to bring down to the physical world. What brings down the shechina into the olam hazeh hagashmi mitzvahs maisias that are done with physical things. And indeed, when we do so every day, then b'shemen al reishcha al yechsar, and we can do it. We have the schus of bringing the shechina down dira b'tachtainim. And on this we say, how did an Allah shoyel? We're going to come back to you, Perek shoyel. And here we start, Chavra Freilach, chapter 24. So like we mentioned, that the concept, the issue of Amir La'akum isn't only that on Shabbos we may not tell a guy what to do for us. We're speaking about doing something that we're not allowed to do, that also. But even if we don't speak to the guy on Shabbos, we speak to the guy out of Shabbos. For the guy to do something for us on Shabbos. So if the issue is v'daber davar, don't speak about it, you're not speaking about it on Shabbos. But there is another aspect, like Rashi writes here, this is the Rashi, that yesh lichus la'akum l'chumra for Shabbos. So what that I didn't mention anything to the guy? He's doing it for me on Shabbos. He's an extension of me. That is asur midrabanan. And therefore, there are times that the Rabbanan themselves, so to say, gave ahead. They waived this issur. So says the Mishnah, this is the example. Me, shehech baderech, meaning that you were anticipating getting to your destination before Shabbos, but you made a mistake, and it's getting dark, and you're still on the derech, and you have in your pocket, you have your wallet. So if there would not be a solution, then there's a fear that you would not, you would carry it. So what does the Mishnah say? Noisen kisoy l'nochri, give your wallet to a goy, while it is still Erev Shabbos, and the Isur here is waived. However, or the im ein imay nochri, second best, and this is taka the seder of priorities, manichay al chamoir, put your wallet on your donkey, which is also asr. And as we mentioned in the introduction, putting something of yours on your animal and you walking with your animal, that's called mechamer acher behemtoi. That's an isur d'oraisa. It's from the Aseret Sadibris. And as we'll have a machlokes, two different girsas in Shitas Rami Bar Chama, whether it's a chatos and skila, whether maybe it's not that severe of a punishment. We'll have actually at a total of 3 shitas going into the next daf. But it's zikr and isur d'oraisa. Now we can never waive an isur d'oraisa, so we'll see that there's a way to put your wallet on a donkey in a way that you're not violating an isur d'oraisa. Giving it to the goy is still better, but if there is no nachri, then do an act of being mechamer acher behemtoi. Now, when you enter into the first chatzar in the city, in other words, we're speaking about you have your item on the animal, and here already it's safe. If you're going to unload the animal, do it ASAP. So now there's another issue. How are you to unload it off your animal? So says the Mishnah, noitel esakelim anitolim b'Shabbos, if the items that you put on the donkey are not muktzah, then take them off. But if the items are muktzah, so now don't let give kala achayad. So the example here will be given, matir achavol, you undo the ropes that are holding up the saddle, hasakin noiflim aleim, and the sacks or the saddle will fall by themselves, and therefore you're not going to be touching muktzah. And what the Mishnah is also teaching us is that don't say, since these items are muktzah, I'll leave it on the animal. That's not allowed because of tzar balachayim, as we'll have a story in the Gemara. You can't leave stuff on the animal stand the whole Shabbos. Someone did that and their animal died. All right, says the Gemara. First of all, my right? Look inside. This is the Rashi. The Rashi under the Gemara, the first white line. He's becoming your shliach. Yesh shlichus la'akum lechumra. Even though in Kedushin, ga'atem gamatem. Ma'atem b'nei bris, af shluchachem b'nei bris, take, that's midoiraisa. But l'chumra, we do apply the concept of shlichus, so why was it allowed? So the Gemara explains that kimlu l'rabanan, the ein adam maimed atzmei alamayne. It's very difficult. It's very difficult to tell a person, hold yourself back from not saving your money. The iloi shadisle, if you won't find the permitted way of doing it, then maybe asur la'asuya arba amas b'rishus harabim. And my friends, sometimes you say, appreciate the fact that here it's Misha Hechshech Olav. It's not that it's in the middle of Shabbos and a person is going to pick up a wallet and go walk with the wallet. It's already in your pocket and you don't have a watch. You don't have a watch and you're thinking, oh, I still have another few moments before Shabbos. Many times people do that, even with the watch today. All of this is why even a person who's not Berishe Askinan, a person, because of he has so much money in his wallet, he has his credit cards, he has his license, he's going to push Shabbos too much to the limits. So they gave a heter. If you need to have a heter, and otherwise it's asur, so dafka kisoy. This is only by your wallet. Avol mitzia, something that you did not invest time and effort to get. You found something, easy common English, easy go. There, they don't give you that heter. Says the Gemara Pshita, says in the Mishnah, Kisoy, your wallet. So, Mao de Tema, who adina filo mitzia. Why does the Mishnah use Kisoy only Urcha de Mosekatani? How often is it that you find a mitzia? Kumash Malan comes Rav and he says it's Dafka. Now we're going to have a qualification in Raval. V'lo yamoran, that a mitzia may not be given to a goy, elo de lo yasil yadei. The moment you already picked up the mitzvah, in other words, not only do you see it, but it's already yours, even though take easy calm, once it's yours, tikisei dummy. Because there is the same fear that you're going to push the limits too far. That's one version, or ikada amri, that boyerava, when we say mitzia bala yodimao. He had a question about it. No, it's lakula alma for sure. If you didn't pick it up yet, just because you see it and you have an option of acquiring it, there is no heter with amida la'akum, shlichus la'akum. But if you already picked it up, do we say kivin the asal yodiki kisei dame, or do we say no? Even after you picked it up, easy come, easy go, put it down. Kivin the Tanach laba lafka kisei dame. So according to the latter version for this, we say teku. So option number one, which means this is the best option, is giving it to a nachri. Then the Mishnah said, "Ein imay nachri," then put it on your animal. Tama says the Gemara, the ein imay nachri, which means ha yesh imay nachri is lenachri yavlei. And why is it better to give it to a nachri than to a chamoir? Why is that the seder of priority? Says the Gemara, cham chamoir at the mitzuva al shvisasei. Both, as we mentioned, even if I'm not behind my animal, that's the way Tosfos learns on Daf Nun Aleph, even if I'm not machamed acher behemtoi, if my animal, we're not speaking about everything, we're speaking about many, my animal can eat on Shabbos. Eating is koitzer. So we spoke about this when we learned the Perek, B'meish. But when we're speaking about doing the animal doing something for me, in our case, doing an act of hoitza'ah for me, that's mamish. Either a mitzvah saseh, not either. It's for sure a violation of Laman Yonuach. Guys, it's interesting. Laman Yonuach is not words from the Aseret HaDibros in Yisroi. It's from the Avos Chanon. And on top of that, even worse, we'll see what even worse with punishments, is that it's a violation of a Loisasa Kol Malacha. Loisasa Kol Malacha Ato Vincho Vitecha Ubehemtecha. Ubehemtecha. So he says, Chamoid, you're a mitzvah al shvisasai. Nachri I atometzuva biblically al shvisasei. Now the obvious question is, if chamoir your mitzvah al shvisasei, how can they give a heter? We're going to get to that. But even though they found we're going to be using a chamoir be'oifin that there's no isur doiraisa, but there should have been an isur derabanan. But they are waiving that because a person might violate Shabbos. But since it's connected to a direct isur doiraisa, a nachri is better. Now the Gemara is going to continue teaching us the seder of priorities, which is a beautiful, beautiful sugyas and shas. It's not all the same. So I guess chamoir v'chereshoyte v'katan. We're putting chamoir on one side, and you have either all three chereshoyte v'katan. None of these are commanded in keeping the mitzvahs. They're not b'nei das. So here a chamoir manachle. My tama, as even though normally, not the way we're going to do it here. Biblically, still that's a better option. Hainu Adam. And honey, the fert is lav Adam. Okay. Next, says the Gemara, if you have an option between a cheresh or a shaita. Now, we spoke this out many times. Nowadays, cheresh, which is a deaf mute, because of the advances in the world, and there are new mediums through which we know how to communicate with them, so their minds do develop. Many poskim hold halacha lamaisa that today a deaf mute is not included in Chazal's category of cheresh. So let's leave that just to be aware of it. In the times of Chazal, being that if someone was both deaf and mute, people never communicated with them, so they never developed. So they're underdeveloped. So the question is, who has less das, a cheresh or a shaita? And what's the point? The point is whoever has less das should be the first in priority, because they're less connected to the mitzvahs, so them violating Shabbos is less problematic. Cheresh v'shaita. Even in the times of Chazal, a shaita is less developed than the cheresh, l'shaita. Now, the final, what about a shaita and a katan? Shaita or katan. So here we say give it to a shaita. Why? Because the katan will grow. The katan will become a bar mitzvah. It's only a matter of time. A shaita, however you define the shaita, someone that without a miracle, without some sort of outside intervention, he's always or she's always going to remain a shaita. So all that is clear in priorities. The one that will remain a kasha, Elyahu, chedesh v'katan. Chedesh and katan, who should you give it to? So Aliyah the Rabbi Eliezer, Zakti Gemara Loiti Boyalach. Why? Where do we have Rabbi Eliezer opining regarding this, the Tanya? So we're going now to separating Trumas Umaisris. That who is able to separate Trumas Umaisris? The owner. By the way, that's one of the sources of Shlichus, and the owner can appoint someone and Shluchai Shel Adam Kamoisai. But it's not any other. That's taka one of the sources that Shlichus is not given to a guy. Came to Rimu Atem, but the Torah says Gam Atem. So what's going to happen if by Tanya Rabbi Yitzchak Oymen in the name of Rabbi Eliezer Trumas Chedesh? If the Chedesh was someone who separated Trumas Umaisis, turning that Daf Kufman Yom Amud Beis. And what's the issue? The issue is if he's not considered someone who's b'chlal connected to the mitzvahs, he cannot separate Trumas, and therefore that Truma is nothing. Nothing means it's still Tevel, but it's not Truma. However, in the name of Rabbi Eliezer, we say, no. This is a chumrah. Look inside the top Rashi. Vahavia truma, it's considered truma. Not that the kohen can eat it, but le'esoy lezarim, that a zor may not eat it as als truma. However, since we're not certain whether he was able to do it, it's the same, should be separated again. If it was taken good, if it's already truma, who cares if someone else does that separation? But there's like a doubt. There's a doubt enough to asid it lizarim. Mipnei shehu safik. Okay, so now that we have Shitas Rabbi Eliezer by a chedesh, right? So therefore, by a cotton, there is no doubt that the truma of a cotton is worthless. So chedesh is more connected than a cotton. So therefore, don't ask this question. According to Rabbi Eliezer, for sure give it to a cotton and not to the chedesh. I'll leave it the Rabbanon. Okay, the Rabbanon hold that the truma of a chedesh, like the truma of a cotton, is garnished. And the Tanach, as we learned, Chamisha lo yitraimu. Not only should they not do it lechatchila, but ve'im tarmu, ein trumas and truma, not even as a doubt. And what are the five? Here are the five lechachamim: a chedesh, a shoita, and a cotton. Here, clearly they're in the same level. And number 4 is v'hatoyim eshe'enoi shaloi. I can be a competent adult, but if it's not mine, I don't have the right to separate trumos. And the nachli shetanim and shal Yisrael, even b'reshusoi, because there's no shlichus la'akom min hatoyim. Okay, so now that we see that they are in the same level, that's the kasha mai. Do we say lechedesh yovle because a cotton is closer to being connected to mitzvahs because the cotton asa lechlal das, like we said on Amud Aleph? Or no, fakert, give it to the cotton, because if you give it to a chedesh, a observer will see that you gave it on Shabbos or before Shabbos, but he'll be carrying it on Shabbos to an adult. Maybe the observer won't realize that he's a chedesh. The chedesh asi lechalufe begadol pikeach. Mashenka, when you give it to a minor, an observer will see you gave it to a minor. So ikad amri lechedesh yavle and ikad amri lekatan yavle. So there was taka machlekes, and we are leaving it as a machlekes. Okay. So now what is the order of priority? What did we mention? A goy. If there's no goy, then give it to a chamoir. If not, the next is the shaita. And then the question, the last two was a chedesh or a cotton. So indeed says the Gemara, Ein sham loy nachri, v'loy chamoir, v'loy chedesh, v'loy shaita, v'loy cotton. You don't have any option. So what should you do? Amar Rabbi Yitzchak says, Rabbi Yitzchak, we're learning a secret. We're learning something that was dafka not taught in the Mishnah. That there was something else, but the they didn't want to reveal it. Now it's amazing. If they didn't want to reveal it, why did they put it in the Gemara? No one comes to Shabbos that quick, daf kufnun dalet, kufnun gimel. So they felt that putting it over here, lav dafka, everyone is going to hear about it. And what was the other solution that they did not want to reveal? As long as you keep on carrying it, but within less than 4 amas, you stop. Then you take another step, and then you stop. And you take another, and you stop. So then you're not violating it again. It's not something lechatchila you should do, but there is a solution. And as long as there is a solution, we're not afraid that the person is going to violate a isur do'iraisa. Now, this is such a great solution. Asks the Gemara, answers the Gemara, and we're quoting a pasuk in Mishlei, as it says, Kvoid alikim haster davar, that the way we honor Hashem is by concealing. Kvoid malachim, the way you honor a king is chakoir davar. In other words, if it comes to a wealthy person, to a king who might have done something wrong, there we don't say cover up. No, the right thing is to investigate. When it comes to kvoid alikim, haster davar. What's pshat kvoid alikim? Why do you have to conceal it? How does concealing this information give more honor to God? As we just explained. Because Dilma also and therefore you tell people, give it, like we said, give it to a goy, give it to a chamoy, give it to a whole list of priorities. And they were not megala, this final option, but the Gemara wants us to know, it should not be publicized. This is not public, what we're doing right now. Is that what? Is that there is indeed another option of carrying it yourself in less than 4 amas increments. Says the Gemara Tanya. We're jumping back. We had the whole sugya here in the beginning of the Masechta of the Shmoina Asar Davar. The Shmoina Asar Davar that was enacted by Aliyah's Hananiah in Aliyah's, knew what was his name, Chavra? Rashi brings it down over here. In the edict of Hananiah ben Chizkiah ben Goroin.
Hananiah ben Chizkiah.
Hananiah ben Chizkiah ben Goroin. Oh, so time you learned, Rabbi Eliezer Omer, boy bayoim, on that day that they made the Shmoina Asar new takanais, because he had more Beis Shammai, Talmud Beis Shammai than Talmud Beis Hillel. What happened? Gadushu saw. So a saw is a measure in which you fill in, let's say, grain. If you're very good at it, if it's not liquid, if you're putting in grain, you can heap it. That this concept of not carrying it less and less than $1, don't use that as an option. That they covered up that option. This was done during that day. They had so many chumras, they added this chumrah as well, even though it's also an option. Now Yeshua says he doesn't word that this is a day in which they heaped a saw, limal yusa, but Rabbi Yeshua feels that they took on so many chumras, they actually did something not good. It has a negative effect. Rabbi Yeshua, so when you have a very large measure, but when you're selling it, you don't want to sell it heaped. So they had this instrument, right, that was like a ruler, and it leveled off anything that went over the boundary, they leveled it off. In other words, this is a lashon that they Taka added so many chumras. What ended up happening is people heard this. He says, "Oy, I can't keep all of that." And when people heard that they can't keep all of that, they actually, you go into a yush. If I can't keep it anyways, so sadly, it caused for people to keep even less. A very interesting expression. Again, they don't have it in the sugya in the beginning of Shabbos, but you have it over here of how people reacted to all of the chumras that they enacted by Yom, including this. And Tanya Mashal, the Rabbi Eliezer, if you have a basket that's filled with kishuyin or deluyin, right, melons or pumpkins, and sometimes if you fill it up with little seeds, the little seeds go into all the cracks and it makes that whole pile of vegetables solid. It's a good thing. Now it's solidly inserted in the basket. And in other words, when you're at chumras, what do chumras do? They make sure that the basics become solid. And if you have a basket that's filled with honey, honey's already out. It's not mamish liquidy, but it's liquidy. And if you add something in there, we're not even speaking about it. What happened is it's going to ruin it. It's going to ruin it. Let's say it's going to ruin it because it's going to displace some of what the liquid. It's going to flow overboard, and therefore he wasn't that happy about all of those chumras. And all of this is said here in this context because there is an option of walking less than daladams. And the Chachamim hid it. Why did they hide it? That was the decision they made by Vayoim. Alias Hananyim and Chizkiah ben Goren. Very good. Okay. Omar says the Gemara, Ein nachli imoy maniche ala chamor. Now, like we mentioned when we learned the Mishnah, when we spoke the introduction, guys, the Chazal have the right to waive a rabbinic enactment. Chachamim never have the right, God forbid, to take away an Isur D'Oraisa. Mechamer acher behemtoi is a Isur D'Oraisa. Truth be told again that it's violating both an asay, but there's even a worse. There's a lav. I'm saying worse because a lav, is something for which you have to have more to get a kapara, right? The Braisa the Alter Rebbe brings from Yuma in the beginning of Yeres HaTshuva, even though Esodoi Chaloisas, but there's a lav here. You're going with your animal. You're putting your wallet while you are walking behind your animal. That's the definition of machamer. Machamer acher behemta. You're going after your animal when your animal is violating any one of the lamates malachas. Verachmana amet in the seres adibris, right? Loi saser kol malacha ata uvincha uvitachta v'goymer, and then the pasuk says uvehemtecha. The answer is the Gemara. It must be that what way do you put it on your animal? It must be that, guys, we're speaking about a person, it's before Shabbos. Your donkey or other animal is already in motion. That means that they're not making a akira on Shabbos. They're already moving. When you put it on your wallet, they are already walking. So no akira is being made. Look inside the Rashi, towards the end of the narrow lines. Since the animal is already walking, the lav akirihi, as we had mamash in the beginning in Daf Gimel, the kiven the adam. Here's the word. Kiven the adam loy mechayev bechatos ki hay gavna. If I do an act of hitzah without doing a akira and a hanacha, that was the whole first Mishnah. If I only do part of hitzah, I'm not chayiv chatos. Now, by a person, it's asan midrabanan, but by an animal, kan muter. Gewaldig. So this whole isur derabanan of not doing a chatzi melacha, which is doing only a akira or only a hanacha, was never said on animals. Was never said on the machamer acha behemtoi. So when is it permitted? Taka, when the animal is already in motion, and that's like almost self-understood. Because again, you're walking, you were going to your destination, you thought you would make it there before Shabbos. It's very late, so and you're probably rushing. So as you're walking, put your kiss on the back of your animal. Now the Gemara says, hold on, animals don't walk straight. They walk, they stop, they go. And when the animal is doing that, when the animal is relieving itself, all right, sometimes the animal stops. So I don't care, when you're putting your wallet, the animal is in motion. But you're kidding, but you're going to be walking with your animal already when it's Shabbos. And during that walk, when you are machamer acher behemtoi, the animal might stop. The moment it stops, and then it goes, and then it stops, you're doing an akira and you're doing an hanach. The ik akira and the hanach. And again, that's an isur d'oraisa. This question, my friends, becomes a lot stronger now that we saw that which the Chachamim covered up, meaning Rabbi didn't put it in the Mishnah. They put it in the Gemara at the end of Masechta Shabbos. You keep on walking less than dalad al dalad. That's a much better solution. There's no isur d'oraisa here. So therefore the Gemara adds another nuance. Taka, you got a problem. And the only solution is that kishehi mahalechas manicha ileha. However, kishehi oimedes noitla imena. That you have to be very careful. You put your wallet on the animal when the animal is in motion. The moment you notice that your animal is about to stop, to whatever it is, before the animal stops, take it off. Don't put it back on the animal, says Rashi here, only when the animal already begun to walk again. So it's mamash and avoida. You are going behind your animal and you're going to be putting it on, you're going to be taking it off, you're going to be noticing the animal because you're trying to avoid the animal of even making a hanacha. You're taking it off before the animal stops and you are re-putting it on only after the animal, you're replacing it only after the animal starts to walk again. If that's the case, that's the solution. Why do you have to put it on an animal? That's the same solution. If I'm walking with my chaver, and again, I'm putting it on my chaver while my chaver is still walking. Now you can ask, as the Gemara will say, what about me? We'll get to that in a moment. And the moment I realize my chaver about to stop, I mean, it's the same solution. So the Gemara says like this. This is the klal. This is a great klal. Whenever malacha is something that we're not allowed to do, we're violating one of the avos. If I do it, this is the word, with my chaver. That's called shnaim shasu. Right? Me and my chaver, I'm putting it on him, I'm taking it back, I'm putting it on him. You ended up carrying it. So if you ended up carrying it, two people that did a malacha together, it's taka only asur midrabanan. But why would we do something that's asur midrabanan when we have a better solution? And that's the rule that koil shechaverei patal aval asur. Any malacha, that if I do it with you, if it's a shnaim shasu, it's taka only asur midrabanan. If it's me and the chamoir, then it's mutar lechatchila. B'chamoir mutar lechatchila. So it's better, yes, it's better for me to be using my animal. Again, I machamar acher behemtoi. Machamar acher behemtoi is not shayach if the behema is not doing the whole akir and anach. But I'm working with my animal. Work with another person, asur midrabanan. And that is where it's mutar lechatchila. Another solution, another solution. Now, we mentioned before going pachus midal dams. Here he's saying if a person has a chavila is not a wallet. Chavila is something heavy. And maybe some of the achronim say, since it's heavy, telling a person stop within every 4 amas, you're making the journey much longer, much harder. You can't, it's a shver. So the solution is run. You are already in motion, so you're not making an akira. We're going to speak about the hanach in a moment. We're going to speak about the transferring it to another reshus in a moment. Obviously, any act that's asur midoraisa may not be done. If there is only an isur derabanan, not God forbid to minimize isur derabanan, but because of a person having saying that if I can't save my valuables, I might end up being machal Shabbos. They made a waiver for isur derabanan, so they're saying run. And the Gemara is medayik, not walk, run. Daf gerotz, avol kali means walking slowly. No. And my tama, kivin the lesli akeda, if you're not going to run, that means if you're not going to carry it in an unusual way, you might end up doing an akira anacha. So behave in a way that you are reminding yourself, I'm doing something that I have to be very careful. I have something on my back, but I'm running. Now, what does running help? Running helps that since you began to go into motion before Shabbos came in, you made no akira. Yashikoyach. What about the hanacha? And it's not only that, not only the hanacha, you're running into the reshus harabim. You're ultimately going to deposit it in a reshus hayachid. Now, still, you can hold. It's only not isur derabanan. You made no akira. You're only going to make a hanacha. And yet, there is a waiver for isur derabanan. The Gemara is going to say, but there's a chashash that you might make an isur d'oraisa. Running is going to remind you not to stop while you are in the street. But if you have a very big package on you and you're running towards your home, the nature is that before you deposit it in another domain, you'll stop. You're gonna stop a little bit. We're speaking about before you enter. And if you make a stop, so now from a stopped position, from a stationary position, bringing it inside is a bona fide akira and a hamacha. So the answers the Gemara, no. The Zajac like Elyahu, that together with you running and taka, there was a fear that there's going to be a little short stoppage. And the way you circumvent that from being a biblical violation, the next thing they tell you is make sure that when you throw it into the house, you throw it kalachayad. Any act of Shabbos done shaloi kedarkei at least takes it down a notch from a doiraisa into a rabbanon. Taka, there will be an isur derabanan, but that's the whole chiddush. Amir la'akum is also an isur derabanan. But that's the word that Hamisha Hechsh Chalav Aderech, and you have a kiss, or you have a chavila. So the Chachamim felt it's better for us to waive the isur derabanan than the chashash you're going to be violating an isur d'oraisa. And before we go on, look inside the last place was in the Amud. Place was says, what do you mean soif? if you're running with your pekel, but before you go in, you might end up stopping or pausing, and then it's stationary, and then you're doing an akira and anacha. Why didn't we ask that on the solution that was covered up, on the solution of walking less than dalad al david? Tema. Before they covered it up, and they allowed you why weren't they afraid of that as well? That's the kasha of Tosfos that he leaves unanswered. Okay, Tosfos leaves it unanswered, but again, we're speaking about someone running, and someone is running with a heavy pekel, with a heavy package. Could be pasha the metzias. When you're walking with something that's not heavy, and you're coming by your house or to your property, and while you are in motion, for you to throw it there, kala'achar yad, l'chu'ura is easier than when you have something heavy. When you have something heavy, you have to position yourself to be able to take it off your shoulders. Maybe that's why there was a greater chashash. Okay. Now we're beginning the following. We're beginning really a three-way machlokes as to, we're mentioning the isur of machamer achar behemtoi. What is the punishment for it? No one is debating that there is an isur d'oraisa. The question is, to what point? So this is the first version of Amar Rami Bar Chama, HaMachamer Achar Behemtoi b'Shabbos, if someone violated. And the example is carrying, but it's not only carrying. That means if my chamoid is doing something for me, not that my chamoid or my behemoth is eating grass for my animal, that's okay. No violation happened here, even though we're never allowed to do an act of katsira. But if my animal is doing something for me and I'm behind my animal, that's the isur of machamer. And if you are machamer achar behemtoi b'Shabbos, says Rami Bar Chama, mamish like any of the lamates. B'shoigeg chayiv chatos, and b'mezid you're chayiv skila. My tamo. Where does this come from? So Amar Rabba, the Amar Kra, in the Aseres HaDibros, loisase kol malacha ata v'goimer and uvehemtecha. Since there's a smichos, there's a hekish, so we say behemtoi dum yadidei, which is mahu, like the general, any one of the malachas. B'shoigeg chayiv chatos v'mezid chayiv skila, af behemtoi name, b'shoigeg chayiv chatos v'mezid chayiv skila. Now, before we go on, and as we'll see, there is pushback, but this version will stand. There is such a version. But the biggest kasha is, oy bazoi, why is this not mentioned on Daf Ayin Gimel? We're lamates malachas. You have another malacha, machamer achar behemtoi. Now, if you remember, we mentioned Bekitzer on Daf Ayin Daled that indeed that you have some that learn that there can be an av that's not mentioned in the Mishnah. The Mishnah mentions take might have a b'mishkan and chashiva, with the exception of Tanas Adura, the Pasnakat. But generally, the Mishnah is mentioning that which happened in the Mishkan. It says Afi, I'm not bishul because of the Tanas Adura, the Pas. But Machamer was not done in the Mishkan, so it's not mentioned. So that's one general approach. The Ramban says Gavaldik. He says, even according to this version of Rami Bar Chama, guys, halt up over here. Yes, Machamer, Shoigig, Chatos, Mezid, Skila, but for what? It's only if the Chamoir did one of the Lamates. Machamer is not an Av for itself. Like Hoitzah is one of the Lamates, right? It's the last one mentioned in the Mishnah. If my animal does Hoitzah, I'm also Chayiv. But I'm Chayiv mitzad Hoitzah. Hoitzah is mentioned in the Mishnah. Beautiful. Or if my Chamor does any one of the other nine, it's not a violation per se. Just like I am not allowed to do the Lamates, if I'm being Machamer Achar, my animal, while my animal is doing the Lamates, I'm also Chayiv. Chayiv Chatas and Chayiv Skila. That's Gavaldik. So that's why it's not mentioned in the Mishnah, because that's the 39 of the Mishnah. Problem is that you take a chayiv to that level. Omar, Rava, challenging, shtei tshuvos b'davar. Here, tshuva means not a tshuva. Tshuva means akasha. I have two refutations. First of all, now we're quoting something that we learned not that long ago, but you should know what we're quoting now is not l'Rabbi Akiva. According to all the other Tanoim, being that in Parsha Shalach, when the Torah is speaking about the specific failing that if a Beis Din paskin and they said that a certain type of, God forbid, avodah zarah worship is permitted. That's the whole parsha of the karbonos that have to be brought. and including a carbon chatos. So according to almost all of the Tanoim, we learn the rules of all karbonos chatois from the chatos brought for an avodah zarah, and that because the Torah says in Shalach, Torah achas yolachem lo oise b'shgaga, and then v'hanefesh ashetase b'yadrama v'chuli. That's about the chiyuv misas based in, and we have this rule that huksha kol haTorah kol avodah zarah. Kol haTorah kol meaning a carbon chatos. And what did we learn from that hekesh? Ma avodah zarah do avid ma'ase begufi avodah zarah b'shoigeg, but it's something that we are chayiv if someone does it by themselves. So therefore, hachinami by every other carbon chatos, when you chayiv a chatos, ad avid ma'ase begufi. That's number one. And here, when you are being machamer acher behemta, you are not doing it. The animal is doing it. You should not be chayiv chatos. That breaks the rule of the hekesh that we have, that we learned from Parsha Shalach. Number one. Number two, the second Shuvah asks Rabbi, it's quoting a Mishnah from Masechta Sanhedrin. Listen to the words of the Mishnah. Hamachal as Shabbos, b'davar shechayav al shagosei chatas v'al iskilo, etc., etc. But from those words, clearly, what is the Mishnah saying? That if you violate Shabbos, doing something for which you're chayiv chatas and skilo. That already implies that not for every Chilul Shabbos will you be chayiv chatos and skila. Michlal de'ikamida, de'en chayav and ashkagasi chatos, v'lo yalzdoine skila. And what is it? It must be, that's all Rav is asking, lav de mechamer. So how can you say that your mamash chayiv like for violating any other av? So the Gemara answers, and we're going to defend Rami. We're answering both kashas of Rava. First of all, loy, meaning that this Mishnah in Sanhedrin, that is implying that there is a violation for which you're machal Shabbos do'iraisa, but you won't get punished, not b'shoigig chatas nor b'mezid skila. It's tchumen ba'aliba de Rabbi Akiva. So even though, according to most opinions, everyone subscribes that if you walk more than 12,000 mil, you're violating walking beyond the Tchum Shabbos mido'iraisa. But what happens if you only walk beyond 2,000 mil? So everyone else holds that's an Isur D'Rabbanan. Rabbi Akiva is the only Tana that holds that it's an Isur D'Oiraisa. Even Rabbi Akiva, who's the Machmer, doesn't hold that you're going to get for that chatos and skila. It's a standalone lav. It's not included in the Leisasa Kol Malach. Now, hold on. Everyone holds that Tchum Shabbos, according to most of the Rishonim, 12,000 mil is an Isur D'Oiraisa, Eino Chanami. But the Chassam Sofer explains the reason why we're saying Tchum and Valiba de Rabbi Akiva, because we know from elsewhere that Rabbi Akiva does not accept this limud, this hekesh of all the karbanos chatois from avodah zarah. That's the word. So this answers both questions. So if we're going to go with Rabbi Akiva, we don't compare it to an avodah zarah. We don't have to say that only if you sin begufei are you chayiv chatas. No, the Mishnah in Sanhedrin, he's giving an example, speaking about someone, right, that broke Shabbos midoiraisa Rabbi Akiva. He walked 2,000 mil or more, but he's not chayiv shoigig chatas mezid skila. Or another example. This is in reference to the Mishnah in Sanhedrin that Taka implies that there is a Chilul Shabbos D'Oiraisa for which there's no Chatos and Skila. Havara Aliyah de Rabbi Yosi, as we have in the beginning of Parshas Vayakel, when the Torah says Lo Yisavaro Eish B'chol Moish V'Seichem, and the question is, why did the Torah have to specify not making a fire when this was done b'Melechas HaMishkan? So we have the Machlokes Tanoim, right? Actually, one learns that no, the reason why the Torah separated the lav of kindling a fire is to teach you that each av per se brings about a chatos. That's the whole source, that if a person violated all of the lamates malachas, they knew it was doing Shabbos. The shigigas malachas, they're chayiv 39 chatois. That's from here, but that's not Rabbi Yosi. Rabbi Yosi learns that the reason why the Torah specified havara, separated havara, is to tell you that for all the other malachas, you have like a chayiv chatos, chayiv skila, God forbid. But for kindling a fire, for whatever reason, you're violating a lav, you're going to get malchus, you violated the lav, but there's no skila, and there's no chatas, and that is what the Mishnah in Sanhedrin is referring to. So we backed up, we find Enfrit Romi Bar Chama, and that's the first version of him. We'll stop in this year over here, that my behema does a malacha, for me, it's mamish a violation of Shabbos on the level of any other Av. And al pi Hasidus, that's mamish every case of Chilul Shabbos, because what do you think? Our godly soul wants to violate the Shabbos. Our godly soul wants to keep Shabbos. Who wants to violate Shabbos? The Chamoir. And God is telling us we got to make sure that our behema keeps Shabbos. And if it doesn't, that's the case. Gavaldik of Chatos and Skila, God willing, to be continued. Good. Hananya ben Chizke ben Gorin. Good, that's what we said. Good.
Rabbi, if we consider putting packages on a behema, tzar b'lachayim, or potentially tzar b'lachayim,
leaving it the whole Shabbos, tzar b'lachayim, not putting it on the behema. Big difference. Leaving it.
So it's a light pekel, but because it's a long period of time, it's tzar
25 hours, yeah. Also tashir. All right, let's go. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Shabbos Daf Kuf Nun Dalid. We left off on Daf Kuf Nun Gimel, quoting one version in the Shita of Rami Bar Chama. We're speaking about the lav of being Machamer Acher Behemtoi. And just to quickly review what that means. Bachlal, when the Torah speaks about us resting on Shabbos, the Torah includes that our animals have to rest. That's called Shfisas Behemtoi. And as we spoke out when we learned the Mishnah, the Perek Bameh Behema, it doesn't mean that there isn't a single thing that our animals are not allowed to do if we're not allowed to do it. No, it's nicht emes. We're not allowed to do an act of koitzir. Our animals can eat grass on Shabbos, but our animals cannot do a malacha for us on Shabbos. And we have been learning the sugya kishitas, the first toisvis in Daf Nun Aleph Amid Beis. Just to clarify, shvisas behemtoi is a violation of a positive mitzvah. It says in the Aseres Hadibros of Eschanan, Laman Yanuach, the animals have to rest. And that is a mitzvah asay, whether I am with my animal or whether I'm not with my animal. But then there is a worse violation. That's the way we're going to learn the pshat of mechamer. Mechamer acher behemtoi. That if I am walking with my animal, and the case here is that a person is walking before Shabbos trying to get to their destination, and they made a mistake and they thought they'll get there earlier, but there was traffic. They made the wrong cheshbon. And now it's getting dark. So there's better options. But if there isn't a better option, one of the secondary options, or the secondary option mentioned in the Mishnah, is put your wallet on your behema. And the Gemara, and they waived it like we learned in the beginning of the Gemara, because the Chachamim were afraid that if they're going to tell you if there's no solution, then you might end up pushing the limits and you might end up violating Chotzah on Shabbos. So the question is, Mechamer Acher Behemtoi is an Isur Doiraisa. That's how we began this whole sugya. So Chachamim can never say, because we are afraid that you're going to violate Chotzah, so violate Mechamer. What did we benefit? Or they never do that. So the Gemara already clarified that the solution of putting your kiss on your chamoir is, in a way, the chamoir was already in movement, and you're going to be mindful, and if the chamoir is going to stop for whatever reason, you're going to take it off before it stops, and you're only going to put the wallet back on after it starts going in motion. That's the way Rashi learned. In other words, there's a way of doing it where you're not violating an isur, and that's one of the options for Mishahechshech Olav Haderech. So now that we open the topic of Mechamer Acher Behemtoi, one shita holds, Rami Bar Chami says, that if someone is Mechamer Acher Behemtoi Lemashal, when it comes to the lav, to the av of Chotzah, if I'm putting my stuff on my animal on Shabbos, or someone else put it, that I'm walking with my animal, then not only am I violating the Mechamer, but the punishment is like the punishment for any one of the other Lamatas Malachas, which is B'shoigig Chatas, B'mezid Skila Karas. And now we're going to learn other shitas in Rami Bar Chama. An interesting shita. We'll have this in the beginning of today's daf. Shitas Rab Zvid, that you won't be chayiv chatos b'shoigig, but yes, you'll be chayiv skila if it was done b'mezid. Wow. We're going to be learning about something that's known as a lav shenitein lahazuharas misas beisdin. Very important. As a klal, whenever, for every sin that is punishable by a beisdin, for everyone, the Torah will have to write about that violation at least twice. The first is called a hazara. When God says, thou shalt not do this, that, or the other, it's the warning that we shouldn't do it. And then when the Torah writes that same violation another time with its punishment, that's the punishment. It's connected to the concept that ein oinshin ele im kein mazir. Now, what happens if God writes in the Hazara, thou shalt not do it, Hashem is addressing something for which, in most cases, you're chayiv misas beisdin if you do it b'mezid, but it also can include an act that we're not allowed to do for which there is no misas beisdin. Now, normally the rule is if there's no misas beisdin and Hashem says don't do it, and it's a lav sheyesh by my, so normally you get malchus. There is a shita that holds that to get malchus, you also have to have twice God saying don't do it. Once, don't do it, and the second time when Hashem says don't do it, it means if you'll do it, you'll get malchus. You cannot count the warning, the first thou shalt not, if that warning is for misas beisdin, which is mamash going to be our case. That means if we're going to hold that machamer acher behemtoi is not something for which you get misas beisdin, we're going to have such a shita, then you might not even get malchus for it. It says, Loi sasek kol malacha. Yeah, Loi sasek kol malacha is, the warning part is for the malachas for which you are chayiv misas beisdin. You can't use that for machamer if we're going to hold that for machamer, you're not chayiv misas beisdin. So it's going to come out that if you reject Rami Bar Chama, as we'll learn Shitas Rabbi Yechanan, if you're not going to be chayiv chatas nor skila, then you know what? You won't even get malchus. Interesting shit. And we're going to learn more details on Daf Kuf Nun Dalet, how to remove muktzah items that you did put on your animal. Because even though the Mishnah gave a solution for you not to be over on Hitzah Doiraisa, so they were lenient on you being Machamed in a scenario where there isn't a violation of a Isur Doiraisa, but it's not giving you the option of breaking muktzah. And indeed, the Mishnah already in Kuf Nun Gimel spoke about, the Mishnah says that if the items on the animal are muktzah, don't move it directly, move it indirectly. We're going to be learning a lot about this indirectly, and that's going to lead us to the final topic on Daf Kuf Nun Daled, which is that one is not allowed to be mishtamesh v'balachayim. Meaning, number one, we are not allowed to ride on an animal on Shabbos. Why can we not ride on an animal on Shabbos? Because midrabanan, we might rip off a branch to use it as a whip. Once they said we cannot ride on an animal, they included not only riding is asur midrabanan, but any sort of using the animal is also asur midrabanan. That's called mishtamesh v'balachayim. And as we're going to learn a story, that the great Rabbi, was once playing with Abaye's son on Shabbos. He was lifting up Abaye's son. He was putting him on a side of an animal, and he was like sliding off the side, the slides of the times of Chazal. And Abaye was wondering, how is it that putting my son on the side of an animal, how is not a violation of Mishtamish B'Balachayim? And the answer will be that Rabbi held that the Isra is only using the top of an animal. But Tzedadin, the sides of the animal were never included in the Isra. And that's going to take us in to the concept of Tzedadin, and not everyone subscribes that Tzedadin is allowed. Many people will hold that you can't be mishtamish with the top, nor can you be mishtamish with the sides, but Sidei Tzedadin, as we'll speak out, that's something that's permitted. So that will be the sugi of Tzedadin and Sidei Tzedadin, and not only regarding mishtamish with Balachayim, but we're going to have this same concept also applied to another Isur Derabanan, which is we're not allowed to climb up on a tree on Shabbos. Climbing up on a tree might break off a branch. Because of that, not only can we not climb a tree, we can be mishtamesh with a tree. But here again, maybe the tzidayan will be mutir of a tree, and even if you're going to hold that the tzidayan is asur, but there's going to be a svara, there's going to be a shita that's going to hold tzidayan is going to be permitted. It's like leaning a ladder on a tree will be asur, even though it's with tzidayan. But if you have something that's out, if you have something that's protruding from the tree, you have a peg, and you're leaning your ladder on the peg, that's going to be called Sidei Tzidei, and with many pratim that will be Taka Allah Lamaisa, that will be Mutter. Shlomi, you can hear? All right. So we are on Daf Kuf Nun Daled. We are on Daf Kuf Nun Daled Amud Aleph on the top. Again, says the Gemara. Right, this is again another version. Bishitas Rami, Rab Zvid, Masni Hachi had a different version. That Amar Rami Bar Chama, Hamachamar Achabehemte B'Shabbos, B'Shoigeg Einoi Chayev Chatos. Now, by the way, that took away, if you remember, Rava's first challenge, Shtei Tshuvas, was how can you be Chayev Chatos? Not Rabbi Akiva. Everyone else, Taka learns from Shlach, from that hekesh between all Korbanos Chatois, from the Chatos of Avodah Zarah. By Avodah Zarah, the Isur is worshiping yourself, the Gufei. Here, my animal is doing a lav, and Erechanami. For that, you're not Chayiv Chatos. However, the amazing, you will be Chayiv Skila. What are you about? Look inside. And as she says, amazing Chayiv Skila, Mehekesha the Atu Vehemtecha. Fakert. The fact, what was the source? The source is in Aseres Hadibros. Loi Sasa Komalacha Ato Uvehemtecha. So the Torah says Ato Uvehemtecha, just like for the Ato violation, you Chayiv Skila, God forbid. Same thing is for Uvehemtecha, which is Machamar Achabent. Now, don't think that Rava was so easy. Here, Rava has the kasha that we had in the prior version, again from a Mishnah in Sanhedrin. Masiv Rava says in Sanhedrin, Amachal l'as Shabbos b'davar shechayavin al shegosei chatos. Then you should know chayavin al zodoinei skila. End of quote. Which is b'chlal the rule. When you're chayiv chatos b'shoigig, when are you chayiv chatos b'shoigig? If you're chayiv b'mezid. Misas, right, skila. Really, we learned in Krisus if you chayiv kodes. But the Mishnah in Sanhedrin is saying, Hamachal es Shabbos b'davar shechayav al shegosei chatos, then you should know automatically that if you violated that bizod, then you chayiv skila. End of quote. Now, what does that imply? L'chura asks Rava, that if you're not chayiv, you're ein chayav al shegosei chatos, then you're not chayiv al zodoinei skila. Against this version of Rami Bar Chama. So answers the Gemara, no, you're not making a right inference. You're not being medai correctly. Mi katani ha'en chayavin chulei. No. Achi kamar, this is what the Mishnah is saying. Davar shechayavin al shegosei chatos. That's the klal. Then chayavin al zodoinei skila. However, let's add now in between the lines, but you should know, nevertheless, v'yesh davar she'ein chayavin al shegosei chatos. Yet you are chayav al zodoinei skila. Umaniu, that is mechamer. According to Rab Zvid's version of Rami Bar Chama, says the Gemara. Now that we had both of these girsas, Bishitasai, here I had another shita of the punishments from Achamer. Rava, Achua, the brother of Rav Mari Barachel, and as we mentioned many times, that Bar Rachel, we mentioned the mother, because that's the normal version, is that Shmuel's daughters were kidnapped, as the Gemara tells us in Ksubis. And even though the Gemara there says that they entered the Beis HaMedrash, and they said, right, that we were taking captives, but with Tahira, one of them actually was violated by someone called Isir, and later that Isir became a ger. But since Rami was born, Hayrasei was Shaloi B'Kedusha, we don't quote Isir. So we say Rami Barachel. That's the normal. However, here on Shabbos Kuf Nun Daled v'Amri La, that this Rava is Avua the Rav Mari Barachel, and that's normally not what we know. Normally we know that the father of Rav Mari is Isur. He was called Isur Giyoira, Isur Deger. So before we go on to what he's saying, the Gemara Taka interrupts. The Gemara Fresla Lishna Basra, that Rava is the father. I don't understand something. Kasha. We know that this Rav Mari was great, and they wanted to appoint him to be a dayan, but they had a shaila whether you can do it. Now, really, from Parsha Shoiftim, Soim Tosim Alecha Melech Mikerav Achecha, and the Soim Tosim, any type of appointment on the community has to be Mikerav Achecha, which means not a ger, nor someone that's born to both parents that are converts. But here, again, that was the version that Hoyrasoi was from not a Yid. Then he converted. The mother was a Yid. So they didn't know whether they can appoint Mari, and we needed the Rav to dash. No. Since one parent was Jewish, born Jewish, she can be appointed. Why did we need to have Rav being Mashir Mari Barachel in order to appoint him Bepur say the Bavel? Pursa means he should be an officer, whatever that position was. If the father was Rava, and Tosfos says if the father is Rava, why would they not call him the son of Rava? Because since the great Shmuel is not the great Shmuel, you want to be meyachas him after Shmuel. That wouldn't be a kasha. But why do we need enough to be matir? So what kind of version is that? And the Gemara counters, that doesn't refute this version, because it could be there were two Mari Barachels. One Mari Barachel that was Taka, the son of Isur Giyura, and he needed to have Rav saying that since the mother was a Yidina from birth, he was allowed to be appointed. And then there was another one. But be that as it may, whichever one, let's continue. A third opinion of the punishment of Muhammad, Liftur, with the most lenient of opinions, that Omar Rabbi Yechanan, HaMachamed Acher Behemte B'Shabbos, Patur Miklum. You know what klum means? Not only are you not chayiv chatos, not only are you not chayiv v'zadin skila, you're not going to get malchus. It's osur d'oraisa. We're not, God forbid, minimizing it, but there's no punishment at all. And he explains, as everyone subscribes to the hekesh from Avodah Zarah and Parsha Shalach, as we learned in the last Amid, the whole Chakal Ater Kol Avodah Zarah, Avodah Zarah, right, Begufei or Avid Maisa here also. And Muhammad is not in your body. But Mezid Nami Loy Mechayev, because we learned in the Mishnah, and yes, we're quoting now the Sanhedrin, and we're making the diuk as Rava made the diuk. Implying so therefore, now normally you would say, fine, if you're not going to get skila, the Torah says, Loy Saset Kol Malacha Ata, etc. Don't do something. Here you're doing it. Chayiv Malchus. Says Rabbi Yechanan, V'lav Nami Le Mechayev. Here's the sugya. Why? Because to have a leilav shenite la'azoras mitzas beis. As we mentioned, there has to be twice minimum that the Torah says don't do something. When I say minimum, is that when the Torah says it a third time, obviously it's coming to be machadish something. But 2 times is not superfluous, because any law for which there is a beis din punishment, the Torah has to write that twice. Ki'ilu, the first time, God is warning us, don't do it. Ein oinshin el kein mazirin. First time is a warning. And the second time, even though Hashem only writes don't do it, what Hashem means is you're going to get punished for it. Don't do it, and you're going to get punished. Now, yes, loisase kol malacha is a warning, is the hazara, and this is the warning for all of the violations of Shabbos. But since Be'ikin, by almost all of them, is violations for which you chayiv skila, so this lav is being used as the warning for that which you're going to get misas beis din. Even though this also taka includes Muhammad Acha Behemtoi, but you can't use this lav for the warning of Malchus for being Muhammad Acha Behemtoi, Gavaldik. Because of Rabbi Yechanan's rule that the chol lav shenit and lazaros misas beis din ain't like an olive, because there is no warning for it. So you're taka violating an isur de'oraisa and you're violating a lav, but you don't get any punishment in beis din. Turn into Daf Kufman Daled Amud Beis. Now says the Gemara, even though that this indeed is really subject to our machloikas, and as she reminds us, this machloikas is in Makas Daf Yud Gimel, Va'afilu l'manda Amar. That yes, loikin, that a lav that is primarily the warning for misas beis din is also used as a warning for Malchus. Here, even that Shita will agree with Rabbi Yechanan that you will not get Malchus for any act of Muhammad Acha Behemtoi. Why? Because lichtoi v'rachmana loisase kol malacha. Don't use the word ata when the Torah says don't do malacha. Hashem is talking to you. Hashem is talking to me. The word ata is mamish extra. So the Torah could have written leisas kol malacha uvehemtecha. Don't do work, nor your animals. Why does Hashem add the word ata to make a comma, to separate? Who niyu the mechayev? You are chayev, whatever the chiyuv is. Normally, again, the rule is you're chayev chatos, you're chayev skila. According to Rabbi Yossi, very good. That will be a case. According to that, on the Amar and Makis, the Torah writes leisavaro eish. You're going to get malchus. Why are you going to get malchus? According to Rabbi Yossi, because havad lalav yotza. Where is the warning? Leisasa kol malacha. Leisasa kol malacha primarily is for azaras misas bezdin. This sheet holds, I don't care, it's for both. Oh, but there is another time where the Torah writes clearly, loisavaro eish. So you have the warning and you have a lav. Here, the lav is in this pasuk. Here you have an extra word, ata. Ata's to tell you, hu niyo de mechayev, but the hemtoi loy mechayev. Okay, so now that we concluded with the three shitas, and going back to the Mishnah again, in the Mishnah, you're doing an act of machamer, obviously, that you're not violating any Isur D'oraisa. Even according to Rabbi Yochanan, the Chachamim would never, they cannot suspend an Isur D'oraisa because you're going to lose your wallet. We're speaking about doing it in a way, as we explained in the last year, that you're not violating an Isur D'oraisa. Normally, we would not tell you to do it because you might violate an Isur D'oraisa. Chazal felt that if they won't give you this option, you will for sure violate, or you will more likely violate the Isur Hoitzah carrying the wallet yourself. As we explained in the last year, it's not Arte Berisha Askinon. We're not afraid that you will, during Shabbos, do an act of Hoitzah. You're on the road. You don't have a watch. It's so beneficial for Shkia to be just a few moments later. You're going to think you're not violating anything because you won't be able to part with your wallet. So they said to do an act of Machamed in a way that it's mut. But now we have a new topic. Okay, good. Now, says the Mishnah, and as the Mishnah says, now that you enter the first safe area in your village, okay, now you got to unload the items that you put on the chamoir. So I guess now there's another issue, muktzah. So the Mishnah says, if it's the right nitolim b'Shabbos, take it off. But the Mishnah says that if she'ein and tolim b'Shabbos, so then the Mishnah says, matir machavolin, you get an untie the ropes, and v'hasakin noiflin ma'alein. So let's speak about that. Omar Rav Huna. If your animal is ladened with glassware, so you can't just say hasakin noiflin ma'aleim yashakoyah. You have a sack that's going to fall off the back of the animal, it's going to break. So what do? He gives another solution. Maybe you are allowed to take soft pillows and blankets, cushions, and put it under the area where the sacks are. And taka, like the Mishnah says, don't do it directly because then you can put it down nicely. And they're going to fall on the karim, and they can fall on the ksasis, and they're not going to break. Now hold on. We don't understand the Rafuna. How is it muksa? What is he even talking about? And the way the Gemara is going to word it, nafakek, the Mishnah said that things that are nitolin b'Shabbos, you can take it off directly. So the Gemara clarifies that Kika Amar Afuna, he was speaking about kelim that are muksa. What are they? Bekarne de umana. Karne de umana are the little glass vials in which the blood letter would have the blood flow into. And they are, Rashi says here, they're disgusting. Now, they were reused, but for another act of bloodletting. But you would not use it for anything else. And the act of bloodletting is also on Shabbos Midoraisa, right? Chayvel. And therefore, they are muksa. That's a great example. Since the leichazule, they are muksa, so that's the solution. Now, he's being machadish something. He's being machadish that you can have them fall on pillows and blankets. And what is the chiddush? Like the Gemara says. The Gemara asks it in a question. These pillows, these cushions are not muksa. Now that they are a basis for muksa, even though they were not a basis bein hashmashes, but if now something that's muksa is on them and they are serving as a base for it, so now they also become muksa. And isn't that a violation midrabanan of being mevatel a keli mehechanoi? So the Gemara says that is what Rafuna is teaching. You know when I cannot be mevatel a keli mehechanoi, if I'm doing something that will cause that mikan ulahaba for the rest of Shabbos, I rendered something muksa. But if I'm putting it on pillows and cushions, and there is a way al pidin, in a heterotic way, for me to remove it off the karamuk sasais. So even though for these moments the cushions are buses, it doesn't matter. And what is he trying to say? That the pekalach of these blood letters, vials, are small packages. Small packages is that you are able, now that it's already on the cushions, you can move away the cushions, and now they fall on the ground. That's the point. In other words, it doesn't have to remain there for the rest of Shabbos. It says in a Braisa, now tevel is muktzah on Shabbos because we're not allowed to hide on Shabbos midrabanan, but since that we can derive benefit, we can eat from it, and therefore it's muktzah. And the ashashiyos, that's the Braisa. There was tevel and there were glass pieces, the pieces of glass. So says the Braisa, materes achavolim, v'hasakin noiflim, mamish like the Mishnah. So there's both items on muktzah. You can't take them directly. You can't leave them on the animal, as we learn Sar Balachayim, even though the tevel will fall off, but the glass will break. Afal pisha mishtabdim. So now the kasha is, why did the Braisa say that? If Rav Huna is correct, then put the cushions underneath it. So the Gemara says, really what we asked before answers this question. That here, Hassan bechulsa, chulsa, we're speaking about pieces of non-finished glass. And these pieces of non-finished glass, if you would throw them on a cushion, they're so big and heavy that if you would remove the cushions, when they would fall on the ground, they would break. So dear Taka, if you would, if the solution would be putting cushions under the sacks, so they wouldn't fall off when it goes from the animal on the sack. So the animal is Taka not tzar balachayim, but now you won't be able to remove the sacks underneath it. Now you're being mevatel kelim eichane. So there you don't have such an option. Rav Huna is speaking about lighter glass utensils. And over there, when you remove, because they don't weigh that much, so they don't fall that strong, they would not break. And daikanama diktani dumya de tevel. Ma tevel de lechazulei. Afachi, what type of glass? It's something that's b'chlal not a keli. Nama de lechazulei. Not these vials that are chazulei, but it's muktzah. Right, it's muktzah, let's say machmas mios, or it's designated for something that you can't do on Shabbos. But we're speaking about glass slabs that are not even kalim. You have this type of glass. If you remove a cushion and they fall, they will fight to break. So there's no option. There's no option. One thing the Bryce is trying to tell you, don't leave it on the animal, take it off the animal. Now the question is, if we're speaking about these types of unfinished glass, which are very inexpensive relative to other glass, so why does the chiddush ke'ilu, normally there's a chiddush that even though you're going to lose money, tzar balachayim, if this is this type of glass that is so delicate that it would break when you take out the pillow, and it's speaking in the times of Chazal, it's referring to unfinished glass, which was then very inexpensive. So that's the kasha. My afal pisha mishtabrim, there isn't even a hefsid meruba. Of course they're going to break. So ma'al the table, no, that la hefsid muad na machashashu. You would think, if not the Braisa, that maybe you can figure out a way of doing it in a way that normally would be awesome with the Rabbanan here because of the hefsid muat. No, so the Mishnah is telling you, the Braisa is telling you that we're not chayish la hefsid meruba, la hefsid muat, and you have to remove it off the animal and it's going to break. Okay. And you can't use pillows, that's the word, because of you being mavatal la kelim eichon. Says the Gemara Tanya, Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai Yomer. That Ashbi says, if your behemoth carrying a gansa sack of tvua, here means tevel. And again, tevel is muktzah. So you have to remove it. So one solution is, put your head underneath it, have it rest, say, on your shoulders, and you move your body to the side, right? That's the best type of kala achayad. There's kala achayad using your hand, but kala achayad, and then there's even better, using any other part of your body. That's the way you're going to manipulate the tevel because it's muktzah. Weiter says the Braisa, But again, there's an underlying message. Don't leave it on the animal. And now the question is, again, devash mechal should not be muksa, but it was muksa. And here, if you would have taken it off, something bad would have happened to it. So Rabban Gamliel decided to leave it on the animal. What happened was l'mitzvah Shabbos Mesa. Again, that's the whole message that we have been mentioning. That's why you really should take it off. Now, why didn't he take it off? We'll get in a moment. But before that, devash is b'chal namuksa. What's the issue? Answers the Gemara. It was a type of devash that it was rumuksa. Which means the honey is already sour. It's not royu la'achila, and therefore it's muksa. If that's the case, this is a technical question according to most Rishonim. Why would someone transport something that is unusable? Like, okay, like kashav amais. Hidvish l'may chazi. The Gemara says no, that there is still use even for honey that is not edible, not for people, not even for animals. These types of honeys could be used. Lekesisa de gamli. Gemalim get sores on their backs, maybe because of the saddles, maybe because of the masoi that normally you put on it. And this type of shmirach is used. This type of sour honey has a function. And as we learned, you're not allowed to put this on an animal on Shabbos, which is taka white. It's muksa. So therefore, he didn't directly take it off. So the next kasha is v'yater chavolim, like it says in the Mishnah. That's kalach hayad and v'yiplu sakin. The answer is the Gemara. No, that that these containers, if you would have unloaded them by undoing this ropes, they would have split open and all the honey would have gotten ruined. He was trying to save his honey. Let's go to the Huna solution that the Yavi Karamu Kasas is v'niach tachteim. So here again, guys, remember that we're not allowed to be mevatel keli mehechane. We limited the case of Rav Huna where it's going to function, it's going to work. And after it falls on the Karamu Kasas, you can remove the pillows from underneath it. Now that it's already close to the ground, the next step won't break it. Here, if you would unload it and have it fall on Karamu Kasas, because of it being honey, is mitanfe, the cushions might become soiled with honey, and they will become ruined, and that in itself is an isur. So now the kasha is on Rabban Gamliel. We kept on mentioning Sar Balachayim. What about his Sar Balachayim? How did he not know? Now, even if the animal wouldn't have died, that's just a proof that it's takatzar. How was he allowed to do it? The kasha answers the Gemara. And this is the sugya that we have in Bava Metzia Daf Lamed Beis. This is a very important sugya. Whether Tsar Balachayim is an Isur Doiraisa or an Isur Midrabanan. Now it's interesting that we say it's Isur Midoiraisa. There's so many different sources or Remazim in the Torah for the Tsar Balachayim. But there is a Shita that holds that it's only Isur Midrabanan. Answers the Gemara that Rabban Gamliel holds Kosavar Tsar Balachayim is the Rabbana. And therefore he felt that for him not to lose his devash, he doesn't have to remove it. And b'chlal, like we mentioned, the concept of tsar balachayim by definition means if you're doing tsar for no purpose, if you're doing something for a purpose, by the way, we hold even though tsar balachayim is doiraisa, you are allowed to do it. Right? We can make medical experimentations on chayim. We have to minimize the tsar to the maximum possible. But nevertheless, if this tsar, we're allowed to do it because it's done for a purpose. So that's really connected. Sai, it's only Yasser Midrabanan. Sai, it had value to Rabban Gamliel. So he felt that you can leave it on the animal. However, the Gemara is really saying that we, or the Rashbi, who took it off with this, we who hold that Tsar Balachayim Doiraisa, even though there's a purpose, but there's a solution. What's the solution? Taking it off Kala Achayat. So he would hold you take it off Kala Achayat. Okay. That's the Gemara. Abaya, Ashkechele Rabba. Right, Rabba wasn't only Abaya's teacher, but Rabba really raised Abaya. So when Abaya had a child, Rabba was like the Zayda to the Einikel. And Abaya once saw that his stepfather and his teacher, the Kamishaf Sheflei Levrei Agaba de Chamara, he was playing with his child the way a Zayda should play with his Einiklach. He was picking up Abaya's child, he was putting him on the side of the Chamor, and the Einikel was like a sliding, he was sliding down. And he was very happy that the Zayd is playing with the Einikel, but he was wondering halachically how was that allowed. So Amalei frek Abaye to his teacher, Kamishtamesh Marba Balichayim. And as we explained in our words of introduction, that step number one is Chazal prohibited us from riding an animal, even if we're not violating Hoitzah. The act of riding on an animal per se is usher. You might break off a branch to use it as a whip. Once they asked you riding on an animal, they went further. And they said, we are not allowed to make any use of an animal on Shabbos. It's called Mishtamesh B'Balachayim. That's an act of Mishtamesh B'Balachayim. So which Rabbi answers, that's again the Sugya of Tzedadim, that the Isur was only not going on top of the animal. Like when you ride an animal, you sit on top of the animal. He was not putting the Einikel on the top. He was to begin with only putting him on the sides. It's called Tzedadim. And this is mamish connected and similar to another Isur that Rabbanan of. We're not allowed to climb a tree on Shabbos. Also, you might break off a branch. And because of that, they says you cannot be mishtamesh on a tree on Shabbos. And here also, what does that mean? Same question. Does it mean you can't make use of the top of the tree, as we're going to have examples from Sukkah in a moment? Or does it mean you can't even make use of the side of the tree? Rabbi held that Tzedadim is mutter. Tzedadim ain't. And Utzedadim, to begin with, and Zakti Gemara Umina Temra, that Tzedadim is not a problem. So the Gemara now is going to try to back up Shitas Rabba from our Mishnah. It says in our Mishnah, Matir, Chavolim, Bahasaklim, Neiflim. Now to appreciate the next few lines in the Gemara, you have to become more familiarized. The Mistama, the Rabbi Steinsaltz Gemara has pictures of how they would have saddles on animals in the times of Chazal. And the Mishnah says, even though it's muktzah, you can't take it off, but you untie the ropes. Certain types of saddles, the only way you would be able to untie the ropes is pushing, leaning on the animal to get to the rope, to untie the rope. And if the Isur of Mishtamish B'Balachayim would have included, you can't even lean on the side of an animal, then the Mishnah doesn't make sense. And our Mishnah says, and my love, that what type of saddle is? These are the words, Bechever Guvalki, which means tied saddles. In a way, there were saddles on both sides, and the rope was all the way on the top. That was the point. So to untie it, you have to go high up, and the only way to do it is to lean on the animal. And how can you do it? To have a late Tzedadim. So that is l'chura raya terabba u'tzedadim legos rabbanan. Now, as we'll see soon, not everyone agrees that Tzedadim is mutter. As we said, there's going to be Tzedadim, there's going to be tzidei Tzedadim. Now, the other shittas that hold Tzedadim as asur will never be refuted from our Mishnah. It's not a foolproof raya. The Gemara says, "Why? Who says the Mishnah is speaking about a type of saddle that the only way you're going to successfully untie it is by leaning on the animal? There's another type of saddle, mit an aleph, not chever guvalki, but the chever aguvalki, a different type of saddle. For that saddle, you can untie it easily without leaning on the sides. Or inami belachta. Belachta means it's the type of saddle that you envisioned, but it's not tied properly in a way that you can only untie it by leaning on it. It's tied very weak. There's like a clip. It's tied in a way that a very little action unties it. It's very easy to untie it. So that also, you don't have to necessarily lean on it. Okay, but now we're going to go into the whole topic. Let's see if we can chapter until the Mishnah about Tzedadim. This is Abaya. Abaya was appreciative. Just Abaya wanted to know the din over here about being mishtamish b'tzedadim. And again, we're mamash going to put on the same track tzedadim of a behema and being mishtamish on the sides of trees on Shabbos and Yom Tov. In the Mishnah and Sukkah. Now, guys, in the times of Chazal, it was very common that people would put items on the schach. They didn't have that much living space the way we have today. And if the schach is on top of a tree, when it comes to the walls of a sukkah, theoretically, the walls of the sukkah can be made out of a tree. Theoretically, you have a wall. The problem is upon what did you put the schach? So the Mishnah is giving a case, the minimum amount of walls, let's say, are 3 walls. Really, it's 2 walls and a little. 3 walls. Even if the Mishnah says shtayim b'dei adam, 2 normal walls, and 1 wall of the sukkah was ba'ilan. So the ilan is a good kosher wall. but the Mishnah says you may not use that sukkah on Shabbos, not even on Yom Tov. You can use it for Chol HaMoed. Kisheira, but the Ein Oilin means you can't use it. That's a lashon, because many times the sukkahs were on roofs, so people would go up to the roof. You midrabanan may not even use that sukkah, because you might, if you'll use the sukkah, you might end up putting something on the schach, and the schach is, as we'll see, now it's not even on top of the tree. The Havamina is that, as we'll describe in a moment, the way they would make a tree into a wall is by actually affixing a wall in the trunk of a tree. Now the trunk is the side of a tree, and the schach is on top of that. And but the ein will be yontif. And my love, that how is the tree becoming one wall? This is even if it's only one wall. Avada, if it's more than one wall, my love, the chok bei ilan. The chok means that you carved, you made a hole in the side of the tree, and you affixed a board, a plank, and nevertheless there is an issur of being mishtamish b'tzad b'tzadeyan of an ilan. The havalu tzadeyan. And nevertheless, we see that utzadad and asurin. And guys, the whole sugya, no one is going to separate tzad of an ilan and tzad of a behema. Everyone is agreeing that they go on the same way. So even tzadadin, being mishtamesh with the side, is also a kasha against Rabbi. Says the Gemara, Rabbi is going to learn the Mishnah in Sukkah. That there, not that you put a plank, a piece of wood on the side, but in order, the tree is flimsy. So it's not big enough to be a wall. How does it become a whole vine? That it's a sapling. You bent it down, but the point is that if you bend down the tree to make more volume, it should be a wall. But now when the schach goes on top of it, now the schach is on top of the tree. It's mamish like by the behema. It's a difference. The whole thing is only nisun midrabanan. On the top they yasir, not on the side. Rabbi will learn that there it's on top. And since it's on top, right, the kamishtamesh on top of the ilan itself. If that's the case of the Mishnah, so look right. That if shalosh b'dei adam, and by the way, that would have been enough, but they added another wall, and the fourth wall is ba'ilan, and here the Mishnah says ksheda. Not only is it kosher, but that's the chiddush that va'oilin la biyamtiv. If the case, it has to be symmetric, it has to be the same case. Even though it would have been kosher without it, who cares? If now the schach is on top of the tree, amay oilin la biyamtiv. So the Gemara says, well, you have a good kasha, but don't ask that on Rabba. Let's go to the way you Abaya learned the Mishnah. Let's say that the Mishnah is speaking about you put a board on the side of a tree, and that's asur. So I have the same kasha. Same kasha. How do you understand the seif? The Elomai Sudadin is asurin. So seif, same. And the Mishnah is speaking about Sudadin, that amay oilin labiyantiv. Still, you have the schach laying on the plank, which is on the Sudadin, and according to you, it's asur. Ella, the answer must be in Hassan. B'gevaza parsichna. B'gevaza parsichna means that b'chlal you didn't even have to bend it. You didn't have to bend it means that the tree is so thick, whether the trunk is thick, whether the leaves, the tree as is in the Sefer, according to him. So the Sefer is speaking about not Sedadim, but the schach is on top of the tree. So there it's not Sedadim, which is why, 1 second, so if it's not Sedadim, the Ilan, Gufei, Doifen, Ba'amuhu, the Shavye. And now you have to add, so what? If you're not bending it, if the tree is standing upright, see, if you're bending it for some reason, the Gemara understands that the schach would be on top of the bent. If you're using that, push it as another wall, as it is, then you are able to put the schach only on the other three. None of the schach is on top of this tree. Well, that's why, because the tree is very tall up. It's not even shayach. How is it a wall? Because there's a lot of foliage. So the sefer is where the schach is bechlal, not on the tree. That's why it's mutter. If the tree would have been a base to a board that would serve as a wall, and the schach would have been on the board, that's tzidehen, and that is according to Abaya, that's awesome. And Daikanami, because it says in the Mishnah at the end, Zajac, kol ilan sheyinotel ho ilan v'yachaylo la'amoid. if you would remove the ilan and everything would stand the way it is, then you are allowed to use that sukkah on Yom Tov. Oin lo b'Yom Tov is shmamina, that the sefer is speaking about a case that none of the schach is on top of that ilan. And again, that's the word. If you bend it, then it's the same height of the other three walls. If you don't have to bend it, how is it a wall? Because it's a thick tree. Then for sure, none of the schach is on top of the tree because the tree is awake in the himlin. Okay. So this question of tzedadin that you see clearly Abaye and Rabbi were having this discussion is really kitan leme ketanoi. Perhaps it's a machlokes tanoi. And now we're quoting a brayso. We're going back again. We're going back to Sukkah. We're learning about Sidein of an Ilan, but we're putting it together with Sidein of a Balachai. That Ein Oilon Biyantif. This is again the tree that has two walls that are man-made. One wall is an Ilan. It's kosher for Chalamayit, but you can't use it on Yom Tov because you might end up putting stuff on the schach and then you're being mishtamesh on an Ilan or on the side of an Ilan. And Rabbi Shimon and Allah in the name of Rav Meir, Oilon Biyantif, you could use it on Yom Tov. And same case, you have one, the wall was put inside the side of the tree, a wall, you're not bending anything over, but the wall is tzidehen, and the machlokes, whether you can use it on Yom Tov or not, is the machlokes. The Marsavit Shudadin Asur, that's the Tanach. So he says that it's kosher, but ein oilon lo b'Yom Tov. And Omar Savar, in the name of Rabbi Meir, that like Rabbi will follow that shita, that it's mutter, because the schach is not on top of it, it's only on the side of, and therefore you're good. Abaye, who holds tzedadin is usher, until the end he fought. So Amar Abaye, no, everyone holds tzedadin is usher. Now Abaye introduces a new concept. Now what's b'tzidei tzedadin? So let me speak out. Any plank, any board, that's the choyek that was engraved and inserted in the trunk of the tree, that's called sidein, enochanami. And if you were to lean on top of that plank, it's still called sidein. But schach protrudes further out. The schach is not on top. The schach goes farther than the walls a little bit. And when you would use the schach as a shelf, what should you think about practically? That means you would use the edges of the schach. That part of the schach that goes further out, that's not called sidein. It's leaning on sidein. But that part of the schach is called the sides of the sides. Sidei sideim. Sidei sideim, even there, look at Abaye, machlokes tanoim. The one that's matir, mishum Rab Meir, that's b'tzidei sideim. Gevaldik. Mar Sovar, the Tanach. Sideim, everyone holds it sasa. Even sidei sideim is asurim. However, in the name of Rab Meir, Umar Sovar, Sidei Sideim is Moter. However, Rava Amar, Manda Asa, Rava holds like this. Rava holds that you're right, Abaye. If Taka the Schach that normally protrudes beyond the walls is called, and you're using that Schach, it's called Sidei Sideim. And there's Taka Machlokes Sidei Sideim, but that goes together with Machlokes Sideim. Rava Amar, not like Abaye. Don't forget, Rabbi is also a Talmud of Rabbi. Rabbi held that Sideim is mutter. He was playing with the Einikel. He was playing with Abaye's child on the side of the Chamoir. Manda Asr Sideim, Asr Nami B'Tzidei Sideim. Umanda Al the Shari B'Tzidei Sideim, Shari Nami B'Tzideim, and that will be the sheet of Rabbi. So Eis Ve'Rav Mishashil Rabbi. However, going to DAF Kufnun Hey Noatz. And we're going into a whole different thing, and we're speaking about Eruvei Techumen. And if I want to walk beyond 2,000 Amma, the solution that we'll have is that as long as I take in Shabbos, from wherever I take in Shabbos, I have from there to any direction 2,000 Ammas. So the Chiddush is of an Eruv Techumen that even if physically I am in my house, if before Shabbos I leave a meal, a Su'uda, not 2,000, less than 2,000 Amos, 1999 away from me, which means that I'm allowed to get there. It's Keilu, I began Shabbos from there. And you count the 2,000 Amos from there. Now, where is the there? Someplace. It has to be in a place that I have access, halachic access to the meal. What happens if that's the case over here, that if not, Yosei Be'ilan, if someone stuck a piece of wood into a tree, into the side of a tree, and from it, the talaba kalkala, and a basket is hanging from it. Now, my friends, the typical width inside the basket, the floor of a basket was 4 by 4. Let's go back to the beginning of Masechta Shabbos. Any area that's 4 by 4, and it is 10 tefachim above the ground, has a din of reshus hayachid. So if the basket is hanging high up, if the basket is hanging l'mayla masara tefachim, then how will a person get to the food? I mean, okay, let's make believe that I'm under my basket. So what? The food was in the basket. For me to take the food from the basket, I have to take it from the basket. If I'm standing in reshus harabim in a field, then I can never take the food without violating choitzah. So since halachically I can't get access to the food, l'mayla masara tefachim, the eruv is worthless. Ein eruv eruv. If it's lamata masara tefachim, then eruv is a good eruv. End of Braisa. Now says the Gemara, time of the knots yosef be'ilah. Holy knots, but if I would not insert it into the tree, because my friends, when you insert it into the tree, that means the basket is called tzidei tzedeim, of course, because there is the yosef, right? The wood that's protruding from the tree is called tzedeim, and now the basket is tzidei tzedeim, and you're good, which implies that holy knots, but you tied the basket directly, let's say, on a branch, then you would not be allowed to take anything off because you're using the tzad of vanilla. And nevertheless, the kashori b'tzidei tzadadim. So l'chura, Rava, they don't go together. Clearly, this Braisa, this Tanach ascribes to it's asur to be mishtamish b'tzidein, and yet b'tzidei tzedeim it's mutir. So Amarav Papa. Here we're speaking about a basket that whenever you put something in, or more importantly, when you take something out, the mouth of the basket is narrow, which means you'll have to move the basket a lot. And that's going to bring about the shaking, the moving of a tree. Since the Bahadi de Kushaka Leila Eruv, therefore, Komenid Leila Ilan, therefore, it's not even called the side of the tree. Let's go with Rabbi. Let's go with Rabbi. That whenever it's mutar tzedeim, it's mutar tzedei tzedeim. Wherever it's asur tzedei tzedeim, asur tzedeim. Whenever you're being mishtamish on a tree, ba'oifen, that you're going to move the tree itself, that's the worst. That's the worst. And the solution of putting the peg is that here, there's different ways of learning it, is because it's not directly on the tree, even though the basket is narrow, you're going to move the basket a lot. It's not going to shake the tree. That's why it's okay. That's why it's okay. Alama, the whole issue is you have to make sure that it's not a bona fide reshus hayachid. And the Gemara says, ve'ilchasa, not that we put them together, tzedadin asurim and tzedei tzedadim mutarim. Not like Rabbi. They don't travel together. We say that right aside of Yal Kegam. But my friends, this is not their machloikas. This is only of how they, this is machloikas as a Rabba, the Shitas Rabba, the Shitas Tanoim, okay? And we don't pass in here like Rabba. Tzedadim asurim, tzedei tzedadim mutarim. Amar Ravashi, hashta do amar tzedadin asurim. So he's giving you a practical application. High dargo de madlo. So there used to be shoimer huts, little huts that were high up on a stake, where someone would stand guard over a orchard, including a palm field. And the ladders that they used to have to go into these little haiskalach that were high up, normally they would lean the ladders on a tree. Leaning a ladder on the side of a tree that's the tzedadin, which is awesome. So he's saying that high darga the madlo, these little ladders that will help you get up to the little booth, if you want to do an act of shmira, as we just learned in the last Perek, which is takamutter to be done on Shabbos, because then the havalei tzedadin. What is the solution? Take a stake, take a piece of wood, mamish like in the case of the Eirat Techumen and the Braisa here, and put it in the side of a tree and lean the ladder on that stake, lean the ladder on that piece of wood. That's called tzedei tzedadim. Ela linchei agevaze, that's protruding from the dikla, and then it's leaning on this. That's called tzedei tzedadim, because you're going on the ladder. The ladder is already removed from the tzad. The ladder is leaning on a peg. But you have to know the practical application. When you would go up, sometimes when you would want to chop your balance, you would lean on the side of the tree. Be careful not to do that. But make sure that not only you don't rest your foot on the tree, don't rest your foot on that little beam that's protruding from the tree, because then again you're being mishtamish b'tzideim ella lisnach akonim. Make sure that you keep your feet on the ladder, on the rungs of the ladder, and that is again that is tzidus yedem and that's mutter. Just to add in an interesting Hasidic insight over here, that basically meruba midu toiva. When it comes to violating an isur, tzideim is still connected to the isur. Tzidein is already so removed that you are removed from doing something negative. In the positive, meruma midotayva. Meruma midotayva means is that we lean on the great people, right? And we should know that if we lean, what's the whole nesoida is tzidein. But that's great, as long as I'm leaning on you and you're leaning on, and ultimately everything comes from Moshe Sinai. In the middle toiva, then we're leaning on kedusha. It's good that way. When it comes to a prohibition, we say indirect. Is taka completely removed, and it is mutter, God willing, to be continued. Very good. The next few daf are mamish gavaldik. You have no idea what we're going to head into. Wow, mamish, mices and mazolis. We're going to have the sugi of mazolis on this week. In Mazali Yisrael, there's going to be a whole Jewish astrology, so to say, kosher. And then we're going to learn Ein Mazali Yisrael. We have a very beautiful next few days. To be continued.
Rabbi.
Yes.
If you'll give reshus, can we make a CM in my backyard with a completely social distancing? We'll talk about it?
Yes.
Great.
In a box.
All right.
See you in a box.